On this channel, I often talk about political realism, how power functions in the real world. I've explored this in the American Empire, Brexit, and other videos. Shows like The Sopranos and Game of Thrones depict a similar theme. Yet one of my favorite pieces of media that explores this is the series Vampire: The Masquerade. When I was in high school, I discovered the game Bloodlines, as well as the channel The Gentleman Gamer, who explored the history and lore of the universe. Though I've never played the tabletop version of the game, his videos caused me to appreciate the universe's lore, which presents a unique form of mythology. Bloodlines, the second game of the series, has become a cult classic among many gamers. Not only is it a great portrayal of politics, but it shows the potential of video games as a medium for storytelling. The game is becoming old now, having come out in 2004, yet its quality remains resilient after 20 years. While some games like Diablo have had graphical overhauls, one that might benefit from this and gain true longevity is Bloodlines. In 2015, Paradox Interactive acquired the owner of the series, White Wolf Studios, yet haven't done much with the property since then. There have been aborted plans and announcements to make a sequel to the game, with some attempts to hire the original team, but the project has been continually delayed and canceled due to issues with the sequel's integrity and quality. So in this video, we'll explore the lore and psychology of vampires in general, explore the mythology of the Vampire: The Masquerade universe, and finally look at the legacy of its two video games, Redemption and Bloodlines. The first portrayal of vampires in the popular sense occurred in Bram Stoker's novel Dracula in 1897. The work, written in the form of diary entries showing the perspectives of different characters, explores the idea of a supernatural creature. Though Dracula was once a man, he's been changed into a new kind of being. He can commune with animals, scale the walls of his castle, seduce victims, and drain their blood to sustain himself. Enchanting and appealing, he retains much of the charm of his past life, yet he also lives an unlife, isolated and devoid of social contact. Dracula portrays a struggle between the id and superego, the animal side of him overcome by the sight of blood when Harker cuts his finger, then returning to the self-restraint of an aristocrat afterward. One of the appealing things about the novel is the idea of plausibility, that the vampire, though supernatural, exists in a world of rules and limitations. Like in nature, nothing is without weaknesses. Though immortal, the vampire is weakened by the sun, repelled by the cross and garlic, needs blood to sustain itself, and is vulnerable when sleeping. Rejected by God, he's lost his soul, must sleep in the soil of his native land, and is paralyzed and killed if staked in the heart. The most famous portrayal of Stoker's vampire was by Bela Lugosi in Universal Studios' Dracula, though his performance is limited to only a small number of scenes. In them, Lugosi was able to communicate the subtlety and appeal of the vampire. Retaining the outward appearance of humanity, he continues to dress as a gentleman, though his estate has crumbled into disrepair. He makes the same lament as the other Draculas of fiction, having no servants still working for him to maintain his estate. Like in Stoker's novel, Lugosi's Dracula wants to move to England, symbolizing the occult and obscurantist nature of the East. He comes west to face off against the forces of modern science and reason, these ideas embodied by his adversary, Van Helsing. As Lugosi is so iconic, and came to embody the essence of Stoker's Dracula, we can look at the character of the actor himself for more insight into vampires. Tim Burton's film Ed Wood, starring Johnny Depp and Martin Landau, follows the career of the director of the same name, known for creating some of the worst films ever made. In Ed Wood, Landau plays Bela Lugosi, who lives in California late in his life. Despite his prior stardom, he's lost his glamour and ability to gain roles, and struggles with integrity as an artist. Though he believes in the excellence of his portrayal of the vampire, he laments that the world has forgotten him, instead turning to the new actor Boris Karloff, who Lugosi thinks is a hack only playing a monster in a costume. Building a relationship with Ed Wood, Lugosi works with him in his infamously poor films. Though he can be kind and genteel to Wood, who he affectionately calls Eddie, Lugosi is a morphine addict, forced to go to recovery, and due to his cruelty to women, has 5 divorces and has to end his life alone. With a thick Hungarian accent and a face, as Landau says, that contracts rather than expands when he emotes. His idiosyncrasies reflect the nature of the vampire himself. In her novel Interview with the Vampire, Anne Rice portrays the vampire Lestat of New Orleans. Her vampires, hailing from the old world, appreciate beauty and grapple with their senses of morality. Her vampires differ from those of others, becoming figures of aesthetics and culture who literally come from the age of Romanticism. Her novel shows the idea of jumping through time, with 18th century vampires living through the world's changes in the 19th and 20th centuries. Fitting in the existentialist tradition, Rice's book explores the idea of what a vampire, if immortal, would do with itself to create meaning, a major theme shared with the Vampire the Masquerade series. Another portrayal of the vampire is in the film Nosferatu, made by the German filmmaker F.W. Murnau in 1922. Adapting the Stoker novel, because Murnau wasn't able to get the rights to the book, he had to change several things. Though the basic plot remained intact, his vampire became more monstrous. This was the beginning of the dual portrayal of the vampire in media, either as a charmer and seducer like Rice, or the opposite, a monster and a fiend like Murnau. In this capacity, the vampire explores the two sides of human psychology, the Freudian ideas of Eros and Thanatos. Another reflection on the nature of the vampire is in the film Shadow of the Vampire from 2000. In it, Willem Dafoe plays a real vampire who's asked to star in a film. Pacified, in some scenes the other characters are able to ask him about the state of unlife. In one scene, Udo Kier's character asks him to reflect on the merits of Stoker's novel. He replies that it made him sad, because Dracula had no servants. The others laugh and don't understand, but he explains an interesting idea. He describes Harker's visit to the castle, constantly referring to him not by name, but as the man, as though he belonged to a different species. He explains the difficulty the vampire has to convince Harker that he's like the man, when he hasn't eaten food, slept in a bed, or chosen cheese or wine in centuries. When the characters press Defoe's character about his past, he says he can't remember. Over the generations, he comes out each night, drinks blood, and as a predator slowly loses a connection with his past self. He gradually shifts into a completely different mode of being. In Vampire the Masquerade, this challenge is represented as the idea of humanity, the extent to which the vampire is still connected to their prior human life, or with the human world in general. Though it's not about vampires, this same idea is explored in the Prophecy films and the performance of John Light. In the film Uprising, John Light plays an angel in human form. Though in many ways he acts the same as anyone, he has an affect that's placid, stoical, and aloof. When he sits, he gazes forward, with dispassionate and fixed eyes, appearing to stare at nothing. Yet this suggests an unearthly state, one either indifferent to the material world, or immersed in a kind of spiritual communication. This performance, like Defoe's, reflects on how an otherworldly being would present in the real world. One of the most appealing parts of fictional universes is the idea of plausibility, that even if it includes supernatural elements, they have to follow rules and principles just like in the real world. We talked about this idea in the Blair Witch Project, how the witch's power is limited to the woods, how she can only possess and influence people who venture there. In Vampire the Masquerade, which we'll refer to simply as Vampire, its characters follow the same principle. As Jack explains in Bloodlines, in the vampire universe, unlike other works, things like the cross and garlic have no effect. However, vampires are weak to fire and sunlight, and if they suffer enough injury, can be killed just like a mortal can. Worse than mortals, vampires have apparently lost their souls, as Kristoff laments in Redemption. This means if they die, they face final death or annihilation, something that makes the stakes of their politics even more serious. A pillar of the series is the idea of the masquerade, that vampires have to conceal their existence from humanity. Though they're immortal and powerful, if humans were ever alerted to their existence on a mass scale, they could easily wipe them out. Representing three different responses to immortality, the world of Vampire the Masquerade is divided into three societies: the Camarilla, Sabbat, and Anarchs. While all recognize the need for the masquerade and concealing their existence from humanity, they each proceed from this premise in different ways. Like the human world, which is governed by states, the Camarilla comes the closest to this, creating a social and even legal structure for vampires. The most civil of the vampire societies, the Camarilla dates back to the Middle Ages, following war between the vampires and persecution by humanity. The Camarilla claims all vampires as members and has codified the Masquerade, existing to punish those who violate it. Following a feudal system of power, the Camarilla delegates territories to be ruled over by princes or barons, who, like medieval lords, claim authority over anyone who enters their domain. The Sabbat, unlike the Camarilla, revel in their power. Abandoning a connection to their humanity, they observe the Masquerade, but take no action to punish its violators. Unlike the more worldly Camarilla, the Sabbat take their lineages as proof of a creationist origin for vampires. Consequently, they exist to find and kill the oldest and most powerful vampires, the Methuselahs or antediluvians. In the universe of Vampire the Masquerade, these ancients are prophesied to awaken at the end of time, bringing Gehenna on their descendants and devouring them. Finally, the last of the three groups is the Anarchs. They scorn the institutional power of the Camarilla and prefer to live their lives as independent vampires. The domain of a powerful vampire is called an Elysium, recalling the pleasant green fields of the Greek afterlife. The term suggests a gentle reprieve from the harsh realism of vampiric life. A human becomes a vampire through a sire, sometimes lovers or friends. A sire drains their child of all their blood, bringing them to the point of death. They then give their child their own blood to drink, changing their nature into that of a vampire. Instilled with sexual or romantic language, this process is called the embrace. A sire is necessary to induct one into the world of Vampire the Masquerade. Since its history and cosmos is so vast, a new vampire needs an education to navigate its world. A new vampire is one generation younger than their sire, and consequently has slightly less power. The child takes on the traits of their progenitor and becomes a member of their lineage or clan. One of the most unique things about the universe of Vampire the Masquerade is its integration into already existing mythology. Its vampires descend from ancient bloodlines that date back to the times of the patriarchs and the flood. With induction into their world representing such a stark transition from humanity, its clans affirm a creationist origin of the universe. Creationism is the view that takes the biblical story as real. In the Middle Ages, this was the case, with Christians believing that God once walked in the garden with Adam, literally made him and Eve as the first people, and then expelled them from Eden, which was said to be located in Mesopotamia. In the biblical story, Adam is made in the image of God, and Eve is made from his rib. After being tempted by the snake, they eat from the tree of knowledge. In some interpretations, develop self-consciousness and divide from the rest of creation. Separated from God and experiencing shame, God scorns Adam and Eve, banishes them from paradise, and sends them into the wilderness, where they experience hardship, suffering, and death. Eve experiences the pain of childbirth, and after generations, the descendants of her and Adam come to make up the whole of humanity. In the Bible, Eve has two sons, Cain and Abel. Cain works in agriculture, while his brother is a shepherd. Seeking God's favor, the brothers present him with offerings. Receiving them, God accepts Abel's but not Cain's, who, provoked by jealousy and resentment, kills his brother in a rage. God discovers this, hearing Abel's blood calling out to him from the earth. Becoming the first murderer in history, Cain is cursed by God and exiled into the wilderness. Here the biblical tale ends, his fate unknown, and the lore of Vampire the Masquerade intervenes, the curse making Cain into the first vampire. Cain gains a form of eternal life, but bears the guilt of being the first murderer, and is cursed to be an undying wanderer, bound forever to the world of night. One of the questions raised by the series is what makes vampirism a curse. This shows the thoughtfulness of the lore of Vampire the Masquerade, as it contains an actual philosophical question. Vampires are powerful and live forever. For most of humanity, the quest of Christianity and religion is devoted to overcoming death, with Christ even coming back in the Bible in a resurrected body. Cain even has the ability to sire descendants, meaning he's not bound to live his life alone. Thus, the main problem in becoming a vampire is the loss of one's soul. While humans have the potential of a higher spiritual nature, vampires are trapped in a vain material world of endless conflict, never able to see the sun again, and with the fate of final death, their ultimate end is annihilation. One of the ironies of the series is that its vampires are existentialists, trying to find meaning in a world with final death. Yet at the same time, they've made their own punishment. As if it was a creationist universe, one could find meaning by developing a relationship with a personal God. The Bible contains many apocryphal stories. In Genesis, for example, there's a reference to a group of angels who fall to earth, breed with mortal women, and produce a race of men called the Nephilim. The vampire series makes use of these tales by elaborating on them in its lore. One of these stories is that of Enoch, the child of Cain, who founds a city in the Middle East that bears his name. One of the mythologized settlements of man predating the flood, it lies so deep in antiquity that we have references to it on only a few broken tablets of the Assyrians. The denizens of the city, called the Enochians, were devoted to a search for power, and their ambition, recalling the tale of Babel, is one of the reasons for God's wrath and his desire to destroy the world in a flood. In the narrative of the Bible, the flood plays a key role in history. Though the world began with Adam and Eve, it was born again after the cataclysm of the flood. In the universe of vampire, the most powerful vampires predate the flood and are called antediluvians. Ostensibly, God's purpose was to choose a group of humanity who possessed virtue and use them as a new generation to start Earth again. These figures, the Diluvians, include Noah and his sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. After building the ark, the deluge begins, bringing heavy storms. Soon the whole world is underwater, with few able to survive. When the rains stop, Noah's ark lands on Mount Ararat, and after sending out a messenger bird, it returns with a branch, showing the world is restored. Noah's sons became the fathers of later generations, Ham the Africans, Shem the Semites, and Japheth the Indo-Europeans. Interestingly, their paths of migration match with the historical regions of their cultures, the fair Japheth heading north across the Caucasus to southern Russia, Shem into the Middle East, and Ham to Africa. The flood is one of the most unique motifs of world literature. In the 1800s, its universality was discovered, which led some mythologists to think it described a real global event. This theory was explored by anthropologist James Frazer, who compiled accounts of it in his work. In folklore, the Germans are descended from Bergelmir, who took refuge in a great tree in Norway. The Celts descend from Fintan, who took refuge in a cave in Wales. The Greeks call themselves the Hellenes, descended from him and his father Deucalion, who survived the flood. Not only these cultures, but many others describe a flood as well, like the Chinese, Mayans, Ojibwe, and Indians. Other than it being an enigma of history, the beauty of the flood myth is that it suggests a divine origin for humanity. If true, it would raise us out of our banal sense of reality, and instill us all with a sense of inherent dignity due to our origins. One of the unique elements of Vampire the Masquerade is the folklore of its different clans. Each one descends from an ancient patriarch, usually an antediluvian, who lends his name to his descendants. The state of these ancient vampires is unknown. Like in any mythology, their fates are often forgotten or mythologized. They may be deceased, or in states of deep sleep or torpor, letting them speed through the ages to awaken in later epochs. The vampire universe is filled with irony. While modern humans are confident in their science and reason, they don't know that the medievals, believing in the literal tales of the Bible, had a better understanding of the world. The lineages of the vampire series recall those of the Old Testament, which devoted pages to lists of fathers and sons. The ancient Jews, believing these recounted literal bloodlines of people since Adam. While some vampires affirm the myths of Cain, what's interesting is just like in the human world, in the lore of vampire, there are a diversity of opinions. Some vampires are skeptics, disbelievers, and the antediluvians. Though sometimes vampires, also called kindred, are able to carve out places of order and peace, even this is unstable, with younger generations growing to resent their elders, who never die and monopolize their power. In the human world, all rulers eventually pass, and with them their power goes to a new generation. Yet in Vampire, all its characters are immortal, and thus the only chance of succession comes through revolution. The series' plot is filled with young vampires, filled with resentment, betraying and usurping their sires, like in the tale of the third generation. The film Underworld, which came out in 2003, shows the influence of Vampire the Masquerade. In one scene, Celine awakens Victor, played by Bill Nye, an ancient vampire who comes out of torpor to lead his clan. When he awakens, he admonishes her, saying it wasn't his time, but another elder's to lead the clan. This shows a potentially interesting use of torpor, creating a kind of hereditary monarchy, where rule could pass from one to another, with other kindred sleeping to relieve boredom and speed forward in time. Despite this, no clan in the Masquerade universe follows this practice. Like we can observe in the real Italian wars, or in Game of Thrones, in the politics of Vampire, no higher principle can be observed other than self-preservation, sustenance, and short-term pleasure. Like in The Prince, Vampire exists in an amoral universe, which rewards infidelity, betrayal, and revolution, but results in a life of constant stress governed by fortune. In the Masquerade universe, its vampires possess different powers, called disciplines. The strength of these depends on the generation a vampire belongs to, and the powers a vampire can build are based on their clan. Some have the power of speed, physical resilience, or strength. Others can see auras, hide in darkness, or manipulate the blood of mortals in a kind of magic. Some can invoke the aid of animals, recalling when Dracula calls on the aid of the wolves in the novel. Others can impress mortals by their presence, or use their presence to influence and dominate the minds of others. The clans of Vampire explore archetypes and personality, and the clan one identifies with can be used to gain insights into yourself. The most regal is Clan Ventru, who are the de facto leaders of the Camarilla. They're one of the clans of rulers, alongside the Bruja and La Sombra. Effective in the exercise of power, but imperious and alienating, they have the disciplines of fortitude, presence, and domination. Callous in meting out punishments, they use the Camarilla to gain and solidify their titles, and aren't averse to exercising vampiric laws to increase their own authority. The defeated rivals of the Ventru, who were once rulers in their own right, are Clan Bruja. Descending from a stoical founder of the same name, they found a home in Attica in ancient Greece, before later coming to rule over the Punic peoples of North Africa. There they came to war with the Italic peoples of Rome, who were dominated by the Ventru, and eventually came to conquer them. Defeated, in modern nights they become agitators, underminers of the Camarilla and the Ventru who dominated. From their philosophical roots, they become a clan of fighters and malcontents. Like in real mythology, the tales of the vampire universe are contradictory and unclear. Bruja, the founder of the clan, is remembered as learned and self-controlled, but went against Cain's wishes and made his lover Troil into a vampire. Troil, whose gender is never specified as male or female, is in contrast to Bruja, passionate and tempestuous, the two of them defining the two natures of the clan. When Troil learns Bruja sired her against Cain's wishes, she fears he will kill her, and preemptively slays her progenitor, diablerizes or devours him, and seizes control of the clan for herself. Yet this differs in other versions of the myth, where Troil and Bruja are actually the same person, or are different forms of the same individual. Clan Tremere is one of the youngest of the clans, not dating back to the time of the Flood, but to the Middle Ages. Scorned by other clans, especially the Zamishi, they are viewed as usurpers who stole their immortality. The clan dates back to a group of mages called the Order of Hermes. Like mystics, their main goal was to achieve immortality. After years of searching, they stumbled on a solution by discovering the existence of vampires. The Tremere captured and imprisoned vampires, then stole their immortality. They drained themselves of blood, then used their captives to replace it, uniquely in history, inducting themselves into the world of vampirism. In the clan, young Tremere are made to drink the blood of their elders, creating what's called a blood bond. This practice creates a bond of loyalty and makes the clan united, though other vampires claim it makes its younger members or neonates into pawns. In Insular Clan, the Tremere were maligned by others and developed a form of magic based on the manipulation of blood. To add to their controversy, the clan's founder, Tremere, diablerized an ancient vampire, stealing his generation and increasing the power of his house. In doing so, he committed one of the most taboo acts in the Masquerade universe, and made his house into pariahs. Diablerie comes at a price. The elder vampire, though deceased, can still wreak a complex influence on its devourer. The elder can call out from its stolen blood, and oppress their host with intrusive thoughts and visions. Over time, they can overcome and displace their hosts, taking over their bodies. This process happened to Tremere, who was at first imprisoned by his clan, until he became fully possessed by the vampire he diablerized. After years of war with Clan Zamishi, the Tremere eventually sought legitimacy and joined the Camarilla, becoming one of its pillars in modern nights. Clan Malkavian is one of the most feared, due to its expression of the curse of vampirism. For them, it manifests in the form of madness. Malkavians are unpredictable, though they can appear functional and well-adjusted, with no apparent outward disturbance. All suffer from some form of madness or mental illness. The Malkavians recall themes we've explored on the channel before, the idea that madness can be one of the sources of prophecy or higher knowledge. Though stigmatized, in their psychoses, the Malkavians utter some of the best insights into the nature of the world of vampire. The Zamishi are also feared for the discipline to shape flesh and bone and transform their bodies. What this means is they can alter their appearances in grotesque or otherworldly ways. Those of a malign nature can make themselves into frightening or monstrous creatures, while others transform their visages into those of extraordinary beauty or sexuality. The La Sombra, their name deriving from the word for shadow, are the enigmatic leaders of the Sabbat. Though less powerful than their potent Ventru and Bruja peers, they make up for it through concealment and guile. The Nosferatu take their inspiration from the film by Murnau, presenting the vampire as a deformed and rejected being. In consequence, they learn to be experts in secrecy, since their very appearance constitutes a violation of the masquerade. The Toreador are the vampires most in tune with their humanity, recalling their portrayal by Anne Rice. They embody the romantic side of vampires, are a clan of artists and poets, and are often enraptured by beauty or aesthetics. Finally, the Gangrel embody the animal side of vampires, recalling Dracula's influence over animals in Stoker's novel. Often wild loners, they were independent and asocial, and in communing with animals, are some of the most in tune with the beast within. When novels first appeared in the 18th century, they were seen as a form of frivolous entertainment, drawing people away from more productive reading. Similarly, video games remain a controversial medium, with older people in particular, still skeptical of them as a form of artistic expression. Video games are unique as they're interactive, letting the player inhabit a virtual world, play as a character, and grow and learn from a fictional environment. Vampire Redemption is set in the Middle Ages, and follows the tale of Christophe, a French knight sent by the Church to today's Czechia. Recalling events like the conversion of the Baltic or the Albigensian Crusade, he's sent to persecute the heretics. The game itself follows the principles of Diablo, functioning as a combat-based role-playing game. Unlike Diablo, however, it includes a party mechanic, with Christophe's companions joining him over time, and with the player able to pause the game and swap between them in combat. After fighting through the vampires of Prague, Christophe falls in battle against the Zamishi, and awakens later in a nunnery, tended to by a sister named Aneska. We've spoken of the ideas of love and limerence before, and Redemption portrays a medieval tale of romance or infatuation. Though today's sexuality is unfettered, in the Middle Ages love was complicated by different sexual mores, and in the cases of Christophe and Aneska, religious vows of chastity. In Redemption, Christophe is inducted, against his will, into Clan Bruja by a Katerina, who ambushes him and embraces him in the streets. An expression of the Bruja's passion and thoughtfulness, she is one of the best vampires he could have as a sire. Despite this, as a Christian knight, Christophe struggles with his new state and the apparent loss of his soul. In this state, the one sense of redemption Christophe has is the affection he has for Aneska, a lost glimmer from his past life, imagining that even after their brief meeting, his feelings might be reciprocated. After a harsh life in the Middle Ages, where Christophe learns the tale of Cain and the different clans, He eventually falls in battle and enters a state of torpor. He awakens later in 1999, at the end of the 20th century. On waking, he finds himself out of time and asked to adapt to the new norms and forms of morality. In previous videos, we've talked about the significance of 1999, how the millennium represents a change in world values, civilization shifting from the Christian era to a new time of materialism. Appropriately, in the vampire universe, the year 1999 is the beginning of Gehenna, the apocalypse of vampires. Like in the biblical end of the world, when God comes to judge man, in Gehenna the sleeping ancients are supposed to awaken, diablerize, and bring a reckoning to their descendants. After fighting the Zamishi, the tale of Christoph ultimately ends in his reunion with Ineska, who survived the centuries as the captive of a malign vampire. If the players followed ethical choices and retained their humanity, the game ends with their reunion and Christoph's redemption. Considered a cult classic, the game Bloodlines retains a strong following, even 20 years after its release in 2004. The game is remembered as a flawed gem. Its ending shows the ambition of the project, but shows that the team ran out of time and money. Some of the game's issues have been resolved in a community patch, and even with its shortcomings, Bloodlines shows the potential of video games as a medium. Its opening introduces the game's conflict immediately, showing the swift end of the player's mortal life and their quick introduction into the world of vampires' politics. For players new to the universe, the game's opening is deeply confusing and overwhelming, reflecting how a new vampire themselves would feel. Set in Los Angeles, the game lets the player discover the world on their own, rather than bog them down with exposition. After being embraced by your sire, the player is ambushed by the Camarilla. They are then brought before a tribunal in a theater. Aventru, the prince of the city named LaCroix, explains that the player was embraced without permission, and that both he and his sire should die. After having his enforcer kill your sire, like Cesare Borgia in The Prince, a Bruja in the audience, Nines, intervenes, and LaCroix decides to spare your life. Despite killing your vampiric parent, LaCroix addresses you civilly afterward, then throws you into the world of vampire without introduction, giving you a task before you can meet him again later in his ivory tower. Fortunately, a Bruja named Jack, voiced by John DiMaggio, meets you and becomes your surrogate sire. After teaching you the ropes of being a vampire, he explains how Los Angeles was historically a haven for the Anarchs, the sect of independent vampires. Only recently have the Camarilla arrived in California. They'd start acting like they'd been there forever. Jack explains how the young vampire LaCroix has claimed ownership of the city. His arbitrary decision to kill your sire is one of his many abuses of Camarilla law to advance his power. The plot of Bloodlines consists of the player doing errands for the prince, the same character who is going to kill you on your first night. While the player is new and doesn't have a sense of comparison, the other vampires say something has changed in Los Angeles, and the city is instilled with a sudden sense of doom and fear. Centrally, a sarcophagus, excavated from Ankara in Turkey, has arrived in the city, and some claim it contains the body of a sleeping vampire. The prince asks you to retrieve the sarcophagus for him, and later get a key to open it. During the plot, you meet Jack and Nines and the Anarchs, who are resisting the structural power of the Camarilla. You also meet Damsel, who's hostile to the player for working with the prince, even though you have no choice in the game but to work for him. The player moves through Santa Monica, downtown, Hollywood, and Chinatown, meeting the city's vampires on the way. One of the game's most memorable characters is Jeanette, voiced by Gray Delisle. Introduced to her at her club called the Asylum, the game doesn't identify her clan. She owns the asylum with her sister Therese, who when you're first introduced to, you hear arguing with Jeanette. The two have opposite personalities, Jeanette fun and frivolous, and Therese severe and businesslike. In the club, Jeanette is the face of it, bringing in patrons, while Therese handles the business side. Other than the strange aura which has come over the city, one of the signs of Gehenna is the appearance of thin bloods. Vampires so far down in generation, their powers are almost useless and diluted. You meet several of them on the beach in Santa Monica, and they're even more confused and overwhelmed than you are by what they are and how they fit in the world. On the beach, you can meet a psychic or sibyl, who if you press can give you some of the best premonitions in vampires. Though she is reluctant to share and doubts her powers, she warns you not to open the sarcophagus, and that you can only trust one vampire, Beckett, meaning all the others, even Jack and Nines, are using you or have other motives. When you return to Therese, you learn she's a Malkavian, and she and Jeanette are actually the same person, her abusive father being the source of her psychotic break. Due to this, Jeanette becomes excessively sexualized, a confused affirmation of the abuse, while the overly restrained, repressed Therese represents the alternative, the player then has to choose which person, Jeanette or Therese, she'll become. Later you meet the gangrel Beckett, who's a lone wolf and an independent vampire. Recalling someone like Bill Hicks, he's a skeptic and a scholar, working to disprove superstitions and understand the real truth about vampires. He says he's there to study the sarcophagus, disbelieving it contains an antediluvian, though when you meet him again much later after he visits LaCroix, he reverses and warns you not to open it. One of Bloodlines' most memorable characters is Pisha, who the player meets below the abandoned hospital downtown. An Indian vampire, she doesn't give her real name, but instead uses the name of a former lover to identify herself. A member of the Nagaraja clan, she not only drinks blood, but has to consume the flesh of mortals to stay alive, resulting in her being shunned even by other kindred. Despite this and her horrifying introduction, when the player meets her, she's civil and collected. Like Beckett, she's a kind of scholar who goes from city to city in search of knowledge. Like Hannibal Lecter, she reflects the dual nature of humanity, how we can be civil and monstrous at the same time. The game concludes with the player's choice of who to ally with in the end. After being used by everyone, you can join the Anarchs, the Prince, or side with the Camarilla who want to unseat LaCroix. After repeated warnings, and his attempt to kill you multiple times, there's little reason to side with LaCroix. When he finally opens the Incaran sarcophagus, planning to diablerize its antediluvian to claim its power, the game shows that Jack sabotaged it from the beginning, hiding explosives in it to kill LaCroix. Overall, Bloodlines shows the power of video games as a medium, using it as a tool to portray memorable characters and express the experience of politics. The vampire represents something primal, something expressed better in music than in words. They portray the thrill of an otherworldly being, and even if malevolent, by its existence shows the truth of the supernatural. The vampire represents initiation. He takes us from the mundane world of work and banality that we know, and moves us into one of passion, predation, and immortality. The vampire represents hidden knowledge, gaining a true vision of reality once you're in his world. Experiencing endless youth, the vampire is a lover of pleasure and lives vitally forever. The vampire is ultimately an expression of existentialism, answering the question of how we can find meaning in the world.